his wife sent a text to the wrong number, and it was meant for the man she told him not to worry about. That one mistake, one slipped finger on a contact name, one Tuesday night when she was upstairs laughing at her phone while her husband sat alone at the kitchen table finishing reheated food. Unraveled 4 years of planning, exposed a betrayal that had been hiding inside his own bank account, and handed a quiet, patient man the kind of power his wife never once thought to look for. Because what she didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that the man she had chosen over her husband had been writing that husband a check every single month for over a year. The affair was literally paying for itself. And the woman who spent 6 years telling her family she had married beneath her station was about to find out that the building her lover worked out of, the loan she co-signed, and the financial future she had been quietly engineering, every single piece of it, it was sitting in her husband's name. She sent one text to the wrong number. He made one phone call to the right attorney, and nothing was ever the same again. If you have ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, stay right here. This one is for you. Hit that like button before we go any further. Subscribe if you are new. We tell these stories every week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. And drop your city in the comments right now. Tell us where you are watching from today. We want to know who is in the room. Now let me take you back to the Tuesday night when everything changed. Back to a man sitting alone at a kitchen table watching the Falcons lose when his phone lit up with a message his wife never meant for him to see. Marcus Ellison had been sitting at that kitchen table for 22 minutes before his phone buzzed. He knew it was 22 minutes because the Falcons had just punted for the 3rd time in the 2nd quarter, and the clock on the microwave above the stove had read 7:48 when he sat down. He was still in his work clothes, the dark green facilities shirt with the Apex Logistics logo stitched above the left breast pocket, the steel-toed boots he'd been wearing since 6 that morning. He hadn't changed because changing felt like an announcement, and Marcus Ellison did not make announcements in his own home anymore. The rice was left over from Sunday. He'd reheated it with a little butter and some hot sauce from the bottle in the back of the cabinet. Not the bottle Dominique kept at the front, the imported kind she bought at the specialty store on Cascade Road, but the regular bottle, the one he'd had for 2 years. He ate slowly. The game was bad, the rice was fine. Upstairs he could hear her. Dominique's heels crossed the hardwood in the master bedroom, a specific sound he had learned to read the way a farmer reads weather. The short, quick clicks meant she was hurrying. The long, deliberate ones meant she was checking herself in the mirror. Tonight it was the short ones, punctuated by laughter. Light, easy laughter, the kind she hadn't aimed in his direction in longer than he cared to count. She was talking to someone, her voice too muffled through the ceiling to make out words, but the warmth in it unmistakable. She'd told him she was going to a girls' dinner. He hadn't asked which girls. His phone buzzed against the table, screen up, and he glanced down the way you glance at anything that interrupts a bad football game. The notification showed a text preview. The contact name at the top read, Dominique, my wife. He picked it up. Baby, it worked. He signed the joint account forms today without even reading them. He never reads anything. We'll have everything transferred by spring, and he won't see it coming until it's done. I love you. Hurry up and get here. Marcus read it once. He read it again. Then he set the phone face down on the table, and he sat very still, and he listened to the heels move across the floor above him. He heard her laugh again. He heard the sound of a closet door. He heard her real phone, the one she believed had just sent that message, chime with something that made her laugh a second time. He picked up his fork and finished his rice. This was the part that people would not understand later, the part that would seem impossible when he tried to explain it to Gerald the next morning. He finished the rice. He set the fork across the plate at an angle the way his mother had taught him. He carried the plate to the sink, rinsed it, and stood it in the drying rack. Then he dried his hands on the dish towel hanging from the oven handle and walked down the short hall to his home office. The room was not much, a desk he'd had since before the marriage, a filing cabinet, a monitor he used for managing property invoices, a Georgia Bulldogs calendar his co-worker Devon had given him as a joke gift 3 Christmases ago, still hanging on the wall even though they were deep into October, and he hadn't flipped it since August. The calendar was covering part of the frame. It always covered part of the frame. The frame held a document, 8.5 by 11 matted behind glass, the kind of thing you frame when something matters to you, even if you can't fully explain why. The text across the top read, Ellison Heritage Group, Limited Liability Company, and below that the registered agent, the formation date, the state of Georgia, and the name of the sole managing member, Marcus Jerome Ellison. He had framed it the year after Cletus died because it felt like the right thing to do, the same way you frame a photograph of someone who is gone. Dominique had walked past it 1,000 times. She had never once asked what it was. He stood in the doorway of that office for a long moment, looking at the calendar, looking at the edge of the frame visible beneath it. He thought about his uncle. He thought about the phone in his hand. He thought about the text and the account forms and the phrase he never reads anything, and the words I love you, aimed at someone who was not him. He did not go upstairs. He did not call her name. He pressed the phone to his ear and listened to it ring twice before the voicemail picked up. Gerald Watkins. You've reached the office of Watkins Law Group. Please leave a message and someone will return your call the next business day. Marcus waited for the tone. Gerald, this is Marcus Ellison. I need to meet with you tomorrow morning as early as you can manage. I've received some information this evening that I need your eyes on. It involves the LLC and a personal matter. Please call me when you get this. He ended the call. He turned off the office light. He went to bed before Dominique came home, and when she slipped in beside him an hour later, smelling like a restaurant he didn't recognize, he kept his eyes closed and his breathing steady. He was already thinking. That night, lying in the dark with Dominique's borrowed perfume hanging in the air between them, Marcus did not sleep so much as remember. He thought about the beginning, the way most men do when the end is finally clear. Marcus Jerome Ellison had been a union electrician for 11 years before he moved into facilities management, and he had carried the habits of that first career into every room he ever entered. He checked things, he looked at how systems were built, where the load was carried, which wire was doing the real work, beneath all the surfaces that people saw and admired. He was not a man who talked much because, in his experience, the men who talked the most were usually the ones who understood the least. He showed up early. He stayed late. He fixed what was broken without announcing that he had fixed it. This was simply who he was, down on a performance, not a strategy, just the shape of the man his father and his uncle Cletus had made him into. Dominique Renee Parsons had been beautiful and certain in the way that some women are, the kind of certainty that reads like confidence until you live inside it long enough to see it for what it really is. She sold pharmaceuticals for a regional firm out of a Buckhead office, drove a leased car that she refreshed every 2 years, and spoke about money the way other people speak about weather, constantly, casually, as if it were simply the condition of the air around her. She earned well. She knew she earned well, and she made sure the people in her life knew it too. They had met at a mutual friend's cookout in Decatur in the summer of 2017. She had laughed at something he said. He could no longer remember what. And the laugh had been real. And for a long time he had believed that the realness of that laugh meant the rest of her was real too. The first family dinner was at Rosalind Parsons's house in Fairburn, 6 weeks into the relationship. The house was neat and large and filled with the particular energy of a woman who had worked hard to own every piece of it. Rosalind received Marcus the way a customs agent receives a passport, examining, assessing, finding the documentation insufficient. She had smiled at him across a table, set with her good china, and said, her voice warm as cornbread just out of the oven, that Dominique had always been the kind of woman who deserved a certain kind of life, and she hoped Marcus understood what that meant. Marcus had said yes, ma'am, and passed the collard greens. He had understood exactly what it meant. He had chosen to believe it would not matter. It mattered. The 2019 church anniversary dinner at Cascade Heights Community Church was the moment Marcus would carry the longest. Rosalind had been asked to give remarks. She was a pillar of that congregation, had taught Sunday school there for 20 years, and the pastor called on her with genuine affection. She stood before 400 people in her anniversary white and spoke beautifully about her daughter. She spoke about Dominique's drive, her ambition, her commitment to excellence. And then, with the seamlessness of a woman who had practiced, she said that Dominique had always known her own worth, even when the choices in her life were. And here Rosalind paused just long enough for the pause to do its work. Honest and limited. The congregation did not laugh. They did not need to. The words landed exactly where they were aimed. Marcus sat in the fourth pew in his good suit and smiled and applauded with everyone else. He was good at that. He had been practicing for 2 years by then. It was around that same time that the name Derek Holt entered the household vocabulary for the first time. Dominique mentioned him the way you mention someone you want to make ordinary, too quickly, too casually, tucked inside a longer sentence about work, a colleague, an old friend from her college days who had relocated to Atlanta, someone from the regional farmer conference. The story shifted slightly each time, not enough to catch if you were not paying attention. Marcus was paying attention. He asked her once, just once. They were in the kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, and she was on her phone, and he asked her, quietly, who Derek was and why he was calling on Sundays. She set the phone down with the patience of a woman correcting a slow student, and told him Derek was nobody he needed to worry about, that his insecurity was exhausting, and that she did not have the energy to manage his feelings on top of everything else she was carrying. Marcus did not ask again. The financial consolidation happened over the following 18 months in stages so gradual they barely registered. Dominique had a system, she said, a financial architecture. She had spoken with a planner, she said, and it made more sense for the household account to sit under her management given her income level and her credit profile. She was not wrong about the income. She was not wrong about the credit. And Marcus, who had been trained since childhood to trust the people he loved, signed what she put in front of him. The last form was a Tuesday night in September, 2 years before the text. Dominique had slid it across the dining room table between his dinner plate and his water glass without ceremony. He signed it in 4 places. She photographed every page before the pen was even back on the table. He had thought it was for the files. He had not thought about what kind of files. What Marcus did not know, could not have known, sitting across from her in the warm light of that dining room, was that his uncle Cletus had been watching the whole marriage from a careful distance and had already decided what to do about it. Cletus Ellison had driven the same white truck for 19 years. It was a 1998 Ford with rust along the wheel wells and a cracked passenger mirror that he had never bothered to replace, and it said Ellison Hauling on the side in stick-on letters that had started peeling at the edges sometime around 2004. People in the neighborhood called his operation the junk trucks because that was what they looked like. 3 vehicles, all of them tired, all of them carrying whatever needed carrying for whoever needed it gone. Old furniture, construction debris, the remnants of other people's decisions. What they did not know, and what Cletus never volunteered, was that every dollar those trucks earned went straight into property. He had started buying in 1991 a condemned duplex on the west side of Atlanta that nobody wanted, purchased for $18,000 in cash that he had saved over 7 years of hauling. He fixed it himself over 14 months of weekends, working alongside Marcus's father on the electrical and a man from his church on the plumbing. When it was done, he rented both units and started saving again. Then he bought another, then another. By the time the trucks were showing their age and Cletus's knees were showing theirs, he had quietly assembled 7 properties across Fulton County, assessed together at $4.2 million, and structured inside a revocable trust he had established with an attorney named Gerald Watkins in 1997, 4 years before Marcus was old enough to understand what a trust was, and more than a decade before Marcus would meet Dominique Parsons. Cletus had never talked about money the way people who worried about money talked about it. He talked about it the way people who understood money talked about it. Rarely, specifically, and only when it mattered. He said his piece about Dominique exactly once. It was the summer of 2018, a cookout in the backyard of Cletus's house in Vine City, the same house he'd owned since 1988. Marcus had brought Dominique for the first time, and she had arrived in a sundress that cost more than Cletus's monthly water bill, and spent the first hour explaining to Cletus's neighbors what she did for a living. Cletus had watched all of this from his lawn chair with a plate of ribs balanced on his knee. When Dominique drifted inside to use the bathroom, Cletus looked at Marcus across the yard and said very quietly, "That woman is going to spend your whole life trying to figure out what you're worth, and the minute she thinks she knows, she's going to act accordingly." Marcus told his uncle he was wrong. Cletus shrugged and picked up his ribs. He did not raise the subject again. He died 14 months later. A stroke, fast and without warning, on a Wednesday morning in November. He was 67 years old. He had his affairs in better order than most men half his age. Gerald Watkins called Marcus the Monday after the funeral and asked him to come to the office on Auburn Avenue. Marcus sat across from Gerald in a chair that felt too formal for the size of the news he was about to receive, and Gerald walked him through it with the unhurried patience of a man who had been preparing for this meeting for some time. The trust, the 7 properties, the assessed value, the management structure, the fact that everything was already titled, already organized, already protected under Georgia law as a pre-marital asset, established years before the marriage, and that Georgia's separate property doctrine meant it would remain exclusively Marcus's regardless of what his marital situation looked like now or in the future. Marcus sat in that chair for a long time after Gerald finished speaking. He drove home and did not tell Dominique. This was not deception. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He did not hide it from her out of cunning or strategy. He hid it, if hiding was even the right word, because Dominique had made it plain from the earliest months of their marriage that the financial picture of their household was her domain, and because the LLC and its income had nothing to do with the household and everything to do with his uncle's memory, and because every time Cletus's name came up in conversation, Dominique found a reason to leave the room. She had called him that raggedy old man with the junk trucks at Rosalind's dinner table once, and the table had laughed, and Marcus had looked at his plate and said nothing. And after that he had simply stopped saying Cletus's name in her presence. He managed the properties the way Cletus had managed them, quietly, carefully, without performance. He drew a modest management salary through the LLC, reinvested the profits, kept the books clean. Gerald handled the legal side. A small property management vendor handled the leasing paperwork. Every month, rent checks from all 7 properties cleared the Ellison Heritage Group account like clockwork. 7 tenants, 7 checks every single month. The 4th check in the stack, arriving on the 1st of each month for the past 14 months, came from a business called Holt and Fine Barbershop, ground floor unit at 1140 Brennan Street. $28,000 regular as a Sunday service, clearing the account without drama or distinction. Marcus had never looked twice at the name on that check. He was about to. The morning after the misdirected text, Gerald Watkins called him back at 7:43, and Marcus was already awake, already dressed, already sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand, and Dominique moving around upstairs like nothing in the world had changed. Pacing begins to accelerate from this chapter forward. The slow burn is over. Gerald Watkins's office on Auburn Avenue did not look like power. It looked like work. The bookshelves ran floor to ceiling and held more binders than books. The desk was mahogany and buried under organized stacks of folders, and the single window behind Gerald's chair looked out onto the street where Auburn Avenue was already moving at 8:45 in the morning. Marcus had been in this office a dozen times over the years. It had always felt like a room where serious things got handled without drama. That morning, it felt exactly right. He had the screenshot printed on a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk without preamble. Gerald picked it up, read it once, set it down. His expression did not change. This was one of the things Marcus had always valued about Gerald Watkins. The man registered information the way a good surgeon registers a scan, clinically, completely, without letting his face do anything the situation had not yet earned. Gerald asked Marcus to walk him through the account forms. Marcus told him what he remembered. The papers slid between his dinner plate and his water glass, the 4 signature lines, the photograph Dominique took before he'd set the pen down. Gerald listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Gerald opened the bottom drawer of his desk, pulled out the Ellison Heritage Group file, and set it on top of everything else. The LLC, Gerald explained, was untouchable. It had been established in 1997 under a revocable trust, 6 years before Marcus and Dominique's wedding. Under Georgia's separate property doctrine, any asset acquired before a marriage and maintained separately from marital finances remained the sole property of the original owner regardless of the marriage's duration. The LLC had never been commingled with any joint account. The management salary Marcus drew had passed through a dedicated LLC account that Dominique's name had never appeared on. Whatever account consolidation she had engineered, she had not touched the thing that actually mattered. She had been moving furniture around in a house she did not own. Marcus absorbed this in silence. Then he told Gerald he wanted to know who Derek Holt was. Gerald nodded like he had expected that request. He pulled up the LLC rent ledger on his monitor, turned the screen so Marcus could see it clearly, and scrolled to the entry for 1140 Brennan Street, Unit A. The tenant name sat there in plain black type on a white screen. Holt and Fine Barbershop. $28,000 per month. 14 consecutive payments. Marcus looked at the screen for a long time without speaking. He thought about the text. He thought about the phrase, "We'll have everything by spring." He thought about the 14 checks, each one signed by Derek Holt, each one clearing the Ellison Heritage account, each one landing in Marcus's LLC, while the man who wrote it was sitting across a table from Dominique, making plans to dismantle Marcus's life. The affair had been paying him rent every single month for over a year. The irony of it did not make him want to laugh. It made something cold and precise settle into the center of his chest, like a level finding its line. Gerald continued. He pulled up the SBA loan documentation next. He had found it through the Fulton County Business Registry that morning before Marcus arrived. Derek Holt had borrowed $180,000 against projected multi-location revenue for a second Holt and Fine outpost planned for Midtown. The loan application listed the 1140 Brennan Street location as the anchor business and primary collateral. And on the co-signer line, in handwriting Marcus recognized as cleanly as he recognized his own name, sat Dominique Renee Ellison. The account she had used to co-sign was the joint household account, the same one referenced in the text, the same one Marcus had signed over without reading. Gerald let that land before he continued. Under the terms of the SBA loan, he explained, if the anchor location closed or lost its primary lease, the lender had the right to call the full note immediately. $180,000 due in full, with the co-signer carrying equal personal liability. Dominique had put her name on a debt that could be triggered by a single letter from a property manager. A letter that Marcus, as the sole managing member of Ellison Heritage Group, had every legal right to send at any time, for any reason, with 60 days' notice under Georgia Commercial Code. No stated reason required. Standard commercial language. Clean. Marcus sat back in his chair. He looked out the window at Auburn Avenue for a moment, at the street where Atlanta had built something from nothing for over a century, where men with less than he had had figured out how to make what they had count. Then he looked back at Gerald. He asked one question. What is the cleanest way to do this? Gerald Watkins folded his hands on top of the desk. He had the look of a man who had already thought through the answer before the question was asked. It begins, he said, with a letter. Gerald laid it out the way a good architect lays out a blueprint, in sequence, without decoration, starting from the foundation and moving up. The lease non-renewal notice would go first. Standard commercial language, no stated reason, 60 days notice as required under Georgia Commercial Code. It would be signed by Ellison Heritage Group LLC and mailed certified with a posted copy on the door of 1140 Brennan Street Unit A. There would be no phone call, no explanation, no negotiation offered. The property management firm Marcus was retaining would handle all incoming inquiries from the tenant. Gerald's office would not be involved. Marcus's name would not appear anywhere in the process that Derek Holt could see. The divorce filing would follow on day 14. Asset disclosure would come in the natural course of proceedings. When Dominique's attorney requested a full accounting of marital assets, and they would, Gerald said, they always did, what they would find was an LLC that predated the marriage by years, a trust structure that predated it by decades, and a portfolio assessed at $4.2 million that Dominique Renee Ellison had zero legal claim to under Georgia law. Marcus listened to all of this without interrupting. When Gerald finished, Marcus said one thing. Nothing confrontational, nothing emotional, everything through proper channels. Gerald nodded. That, he said, is exactly the plan. Marcus drove back to the west side in his work truck with the radio off. He passed two of his properties on the way, a 4-unit residential building on Mosley Drive, a small commercial strip on Hollowell Parkway, and looked at them the way he always had, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who understood what it meant to own something outright. He had never needed anyone to know about these buildings. He had needed them to exist. There was a difference. That afternoon, Gerald drafted the non-renewal notice for 1140 Brennan Street. It was 9 sentences long. It contained no accusations, no personal language, no indication that the managing member of Ellison Heritage Group had any knowledge of or interest in the tenant's personal affairs. It was the most ordinary-looking document Marcus had ever authorized. It was also the most devastating. It went out certified mail on day 3. On day 5, Marcus visited a new bank branch on the other side of town and opened a personal checking account in his name only. Gerald had confirmed this was entirely legal given the documented evidence of Dominique's attempt to reclassify the joint account. Marcus was protecting assets, not hiding them, and the text screenshot provided more than sufficient foundation for that protection. He transferred his direct deposit. He moved his personal savings. He left enough in the joint account to avoid triggering any immediate alarm. Dominique noticed nothing. This was the part that Marcus would think about later, how seamlessly the days continued. She made coffee in the mornings. She asked him once if he wanted her to pick up anything from the store. She moved through the house with her usual certainty, her usual presence, as if the ground beneath her were exactly as solid as it had always been. She had no idea that it had already been removed. She was standing on air and calling it architecture. Marcus went to work every day. He managed his building inspections. He ate lunch from the same deli on Northside Drive he had been eating from for 4 years. He called his mother on Sunday afternoon the way he always did. He was the same man in every room he entered because he had always been the same man. And that steadiness, which Dominique had spent years interpreting as limitation, was in fact the most dangerous thing about him. On day 7, the certified letter arrived at 1140 Brennan Street. Marcus was not there. He did not need to be. On day 10, he met with Prestige Property Solutions, a mid-size property management firm out of Buckhead, and signed the management agreement transferring operational control of all 7 Ellison Heritage properties. His name would still appear in the LLC registration. There was no hiding that. But the day-to-day management, the tenant communications, the maintenance coordination, all of it would now route through Prestige. Marcus removed himself from the front line of every interaction. He became invisible in the machinery he had always controlled. On day 13, Gerald called and told him everything was ready. Marcus sat in his work truck in the parking lot of the Apex Logistics facility and looked out at the Atlanta skyline going grey in the late afternoon light. He thought about Cletus. He thought about the junk trucks and the condemned duplex and $18,000 saved over 7 years. He thought about what his uncle had said at that cookout. That woman is going to spend your whole life trying to figure out what you're worth. And he thought about how right the old man had been and how spectacularly wrong she was about to discover she had gotten it. He called Gerald back and said one word: file it. The divorce petition was submitted to the Fulton County Courthouse at 9:14 in the morning on day 14. Gerald's paralegal handled the paperwork. The filing was clean, complete, and entirely unremarkable in its presentation. One more document in a courthouse full of them. On that same morning, across the city at 1140 Brennan Street, Derek Anthony Holt signed for a certified envelope from Ellison Heritage Group LLC and opened it at the front counter of his barbershop. He read the non-renewal notice twice. Then he reached for his phone. He still did not know that the 2 letters, his and Dominique's, had gone out from the same hand, guided by the same plan on the same day. He was about to find out what it felt like when everything connects at once. Derek Holt read the non-renewal notice standing at the front counter of his own barbershop. He read it twice. Then he picked up his phone and called the number at the bottom of the letterhead: Prestige Property Solutions, Property Manager for Ellison Heritage Group, LLC. The woman who answered was polite and completely immovable. She confirmed the notice was valid. She confirmed the the 60-day timeline. She confirmed there was no appeal process and no negotiation available at this time. When Derek asked to speak with the owner of the LLC directly, she told him all owner communications were handled through the management firm. She thanked him for calling and wished him a good day. Derek stood in the middle of his barbershop and stared at the letter. He called his SBA loan officer that same afternoon to ask a question he already feared the answer to. The loan officer pulled up his file. The anchor location at 1140 Brennan Street was listed as the primary operating asset backing the $180,000 expansion note. The officer's voice went careful and flat. If the anchor location lost its lease, the projected revenue figures the loan was built on no longer held. The lender would be required to conduct a collateral review. Derek knew what that meant before the sentence was finished. 3 days later, the review came back. The note was called in full. $180,000 due immediately, with the co-signer carrying equal liability under the terms of the agreement. Derek called Dominique. She did not know about the call provision. She had co-signed the loan as a formality, she had told herself. A show of support, a gesture between two people who had a plan. She had not read the clause about anchor location failure. She had not imagined the anchor location could fail. Her name was on that paperwork in her own handwriting, and the lender did not care about her reasons. She went cold on the phone. $180,000. Her name, her liability, her signature. And then her attorney called. The divorce filing had triggered mandatory asset disclosure, and Dominique's attorney had spent 3 days working through the documentation Marcus's side had provided. The attorney's voice on the phone was controlled but careful, the voice of a professional delivering news they would rather not deliver. The Ellison Heritage Group, LLC, she explained, had been established in 1997 under a revocable trust structure. It predated the marriage by 6 years. It had never been commingled with any joint marital account. Under Georgia's separate property doctrine, it was entirely and exclusively Marcus's. The $4.2 million portfolio, the 7 properties, the management income, all of it. None of it was marital property. None of it was available for division. Dominique sat in her car in the parking garage beneath her office building and did not move for 22 minutes. She drove to Gerald Watkins's office on Auburn Avenue the next morning without an appointment. The receptionist told her Gerald was unavailable and that all communications regarding the Ellison matter needed to go through her own legal counsel. Dominique asked to leave a message. The receptionist handed her a notepad. Dominique wrote 3 lines, folded the paper, and left it at the desk. She never received a response. Gerald Watkins did not deal in emotional correspondence. Then came the Public Record Digest. The Fulton County Courthouse published its weekly digest on a Thursday morning. Rosalind Parsons read it the way she read everything, thoroughly, and before anyone thought to tell her something she might need to know. The Ellison divorce filing was right there in the public record, listed by name. Rosalind saw her daughter's name in that digest before Dominique had picked up the phone to call her. Rosalind called an emergency family meeting for that same evening. Dominique arrived at her mother's house in Fairburn to find Rosalind already seated at the dining room table. The same table where she had served Marcus collard greens and smiled through her teeth 6 years ago. The table was not set for dinner. There was no food. Rosalind sat with her hands folded and her face arranged in the expression of a woman who had built her entire reputation on her daughter's success and was now watching that reputation dismantle itself in real time. The conversation was not long. The following Sunday at Cascade Heights Community Church, Rosalind took her seat in the 3rd pew as she always did, but she did not greet anyone at the door. She did not stop to speak with the associate pastor. She sat down, folded her program in her lap, and looked straight ahead. The congregation noticed. In a church where Rosalind Parsons had held court for 20 years, her silence was louder than anything she could have said. The associate pastor's morning prayer included a passage about humility, about the danger of building your house on ground that belongs to someone else. Several people in the congregation nodded. None of them looked at Rosalind directly. None of them needed to. Marcus heard about the Sunday service from a cousin who attended the church. He was sitting in his work truck eating lunch when he got the text describing it. He read it, set his phone face down on the passenger seat, and finished his sandwich. That evening, Dominique called his cell phone from outside her mother's house. He watched her name light up the screen. He let it ring through to voicemail. He did not feel satisfaction exactly. It was quieter than that, more like the feeling of a level finally finding its line after years of being slightly off. He called Gerald the next morning. He was ready for the meeting. Gerald Watkins's conference room was on the second floor of his Auburn Avenue building, with windows that looked out over the street below and walls lined with the kind of orderly shelving that communicated without a word that everything in this room was handled with precision. There was a long table, 6 chairs, a water pitcher nobody touched. Marcus arrived first, which was by design. He had asked Gerald to schedule it that way. And he was seated and settled when Dominique walked in with her attorney 12 minutes later. She looked composed. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. She had dressed carefully, the kind of careful that takes an hour to look effortless. And she carried herself with the posture of a woman who had decided, somewhere between her car and this room, that she still had leverage. Her attorney, a compact man named Brathwaite, set a leather portfolio on the table and nodded at Gerald. Gerald nodded back. The 4 of them sat. The room was very quiet. Dominique spoke first. She said she thought they could handle this maturely. She said 6 years of marriage deserved more than lawyers and filings. She said she still believed there was a way through this that didn't have to be destructive. Her voice was warm and measured, the same voice she used when she wanted a room to agree with her before it understood what it was agreeing to. Marcus listened to all of it with his hands folded on the table in front of him. He did not respond. He let her finish. He had been waiting 52 days for this room, and he was not going to rush it. When the warmth didn't work, she moved to justification. She said the financial arrangements had been about efficiency, not control. She said she had been building something for both of them. She said Derek was a colleague, a business connection, nothing more, and that Marcus had always had a tendency to misread situations. Her attorney shifted slightly in his chair. Brathwaite knew what the asset disclosure said. He knew the ground under this argument had already collapsed, and he was doing the careful work of a professional who has advised his client to stay calm and is watching her ignore that advice in real time. And when justification didn't land, the warmth went out of her voice entirely, and something harder moved in behind it. She said Marcus had always been passive. She said he had never engaged with the financial life of their household because he hadn't wanted to. She said she had carried the weight for years while he coasted, and that his attorney could dress it up however he liked, but the reality was that she had built something, and he had simply existed beside it. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he began to speak. He started with the text. He described the night precisely. The kitchen table, the reheated rice, the falcons losing, the way her heels had sounded on the floor above him. He told her what it said, word for word, because he had read it so many times by then that it had become a part of him. He told her he had read it twice, set his phone face down, and finished his dinner before he did anything else. Because that, he said, was the kind of man he was, not passive, patient. There is a difference, and she had never been able to tell them apart. He told her about the rent ledger. He told her he had learned, sitting across from Gerald the morning after she sent that text, that Derek Holt had been paying him $28,000 a month for 14 months, that every check her lover wrote every month had cleared the Ellison Heritage Group account, his account, like clockwork. He told her to think about what that meant, that the man she had chosen, the man she had co-signed a loan for, the man she had told Marcus not to worry about, had been his tenant, that the plan she had made to take everything Marcus had was being quietly subsidized every single month by the man she was taking it from. He watched her face change. The composure cracked somewhere around the word tenant and did not come back together. He told her about the deed. He described it the way it looked on the wall of his home office, framed, matted, behind glass, half covered by a Georgia Bulldogs calendar. She had given him no reason to move. He told her it had been hanging there for 3 years. He told her she had walked past it 1,000 times and had never once asked what it was. He told her that was the difference between a person who understands what they have and a person who only understands what they can see. Then he leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped to something quieter and more final than anything he had said before. "You sent that text to the wrong number, Dominique. You meant to send it to the man who was paying me rent every month, while you planned to take everything I had. You told him I never read anything, but I read every lease, every check. I read that deed every morning, and I read your text the second it landed." The room was completely silent. Dominique's hands were pressed flat on the table. Her attorney touched her arm once, gently, and said nothing. There was nothing left for either of them to say. The legal position had been explained, the asset disclosure had been filed, the confrontation line had been delivered, and it had landed the way truth lands when it has been patient long enough. Not like a shout, but like a door closing on everything that came before it. Marcus stood. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at Gerald and said they were done. He walked out of the conference room, down the stairs, and through the front door of the building onto Auburn Avenue. The late afternoon light was golden long, the way October light in Atlanta gets when the season finally breaks, and Marcus Ellison walked into it without looking back, not once. 6 months after Marcus Ellison walked out of Gerald Watkins's conference room and into the October light on Auburn Avenue, the consequences had finished settling like sediment after a flood. Derek Holt's second location never opened. The Midtown build-out he had planned with the SBA loan money never got past the architectural drawings because the money was gone before the walls went up. Holt & Fine, the flagship, the anchor, the business he had built his entire expansion dream on top of, had vacated 1140 Brennan Street at the end of the 60-day notice period with 3 barber chairs and a stack of unpaid vendor invoices. Derek was operating now out of a single rented chair in someone else's shop on the other side of the city. A sublease arrangement, month to month, no signage, no staff. The confidence was gone from him. The plan was gone. And so was Dominique, who had stopped returning his calls somewhere around the time the lender's default notice arrived with her name on it. Dominique was still paying. That was the detail people in their circle found hardest to absorb. She had negotiated the liability down from $180,000 to $140,000 through her own attorney, a concession that had cost her months of legal fees on top of everything else, and her pharmaceutical income, which she had once spoken about with such effortless authority, was now almost entirely consumed by the debt service. The leased car was gone. The specialty grocery store trips were gone. What remained was a woman rebuilding from a hole she had dug herself, with a shovel she had borrowed in someone else's name. Rosalind Parsons had stepped down from the church anniversary committee quietly, without announcement, in the way that people step away from things when staying would require them to hold their head up in a room that has already decided what it thinks. The congregation at Cascade Heights Community Church knew. They always knew. Nobody said anything directly, because that was not how these things were handled. But Rosalind's absence from the planning table spoke with more clarity than any statement she could have issued. The woman who had stood before 400 people and delivered her verdict on Marcus Ellison was now navigating a pew's worth of communal memory that did not forget. Marcus sold one of the 7 properties in the spring. It was a commercial parcel on Donald Hollowell Parkway that had appreciated steadily for 6 years and netted $600,000 after closing costs and taxes. He did not use it to upgrade his lifestyle. He did not move to a bigger house or buy a different car, or do any of the things that people who have always been underestimated sometimes do when the world finally sees what they are worth. He established a trust. He called it the Cletus Ellison Community Trust. The trust's purpose was straightforward and exactly what his uncle would have recognized: vocational training scholarships for young men in Atlanta pursuing trades, electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, facilities professionals, men who would show up and fix things and not get credit for it, and who deserved better than the assumption that their work was lesser than the work of someone with a different title. Gerald handled the paperwork. The first round of scholarships went out in the fall to 7 recipients, 1 for each of Cletus's properties, which felt right, and which Marcus did not mention to anyone because it was not the kind of thing that needed to be said out loud. Marcus moved into a house on the west side of Atlanta, smaller than the Cascade Heights home, owned outright, with a yard that needed work and a kitchen that got good morning light. He did not need anyone to know about the remaining 6 properties. He did not need a performance. He was the same man he had always been, which was the whole point. The point that Dominique and her mother had never been able to grasp. He had not become someone different. He had simply stopped allowing someone else to define the terms. There was a woman named Adrienne. She was an architect who sat on the advisory board of the Cletus Ellison Community Trust, and she asked Marcus about his uncle at their first board meeting, with the directness of someone who was genuinely curious and had no interest in pretending otherwise. He told her about the junk trucks and the condemned duplex, and the $18,000 saved over 7 years, and he watched her listen the way people listen when they actually want to know, not to respond, just to understand. He smiled. It was the first time in a long time that smiling felt like something that belonged to him. Here is what this story is really about. It is not about revenge. Marcus Ellison did not set out to destroy anyone. He set out to protect what was his, to honor what his uncle built, and to stop pretending that being underestimated was the same as being less than. A man who is dismissed is not a man who is defeated. Those are 2 entirely different things, and Marcus understood the difference even when no one around him did. The deed is still on his wall. The photograph of Cletus is beside it now, framed, matted, the same size, given equal space. Both of them visible, neither of them hidden. Now I want to ask you something. If you had been sitting at that kitchen table and your phone lit up with that text, what would you have done? Would you have gone upstairs and confronted her? Or would you have done what Marcus did, finished your dinner, made your call, and let the truth do the work? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button before you go. It takes 1 second, and it helps more people find these stories, and there are people out there who need to hear them. subscribe if you have not already. We are here every week with stories about patience, power, and the people who were written off by exactly the wrong person. I will see you in the next one.